Monroe was born on June 1, 1926, in Los Angeles, California. Monroe was named Norma Jean Mortensen at birth, later baptized as Norma Jean Baker. Growing up, Monroe spent much of her time in foster care and in an orphanage. At 7 years old, Monroe returned to a life in foster homes, where she endured sexual assault on several occasions. She later said that she had been raped when she was 11 years old. She dropped out of high school by age 15. Monroe had a way out through marriage, and she wed her boyfriend and merchant marine, Jimmy Dougherty, in 1942, at the age of 16. Monroe never knew her father. She once thought Clark Gable to be her father, a story repeated often enough for a version of it to gain some currency. However, there's no evidence that Gable ever met or knew Monroe's mother, Gladys, who developed psychiatric problems and was eventually placed in a mental institution. As an adult, Monroe would maintain that one of her earliest memories was of her mother trying to smother her in her crib with a pillow. Monroe had a half-sister to whom she was not close. They met only a half-dozen times. Monroe dreamt of becoming an actress, like Jean Harlow and Lana Turner. When her husband was sent to the South Pacific, she began working in a munitions factory in Van Nuys, California. It was there that she was first discovered by a photographer. By the time Dougherty returned in 1946, Monroe had a successful career as a model. That year, she signed her first movie contract. With the contract came a new name and image. She began calling herself Marilyn Monroe and dyed her hair blonde. At first, Monroe wasn't initially considered to be star acting material. Her acting career didn't really take off until a few years later. With her breathy voice and hourglass figure, she would soon become one of Hollywood's most famous actresses. She proved her skill by winning various honors and attracting large audiences to her films. Monroe became a much-admired international star, despite chronic insecurities regarding her acting abilities. She suffered from pre-performance anxiety that sometimes made her physically ill, and was often the root cause of her legendary tardiness on film sets, which was so extreme that it often infuriated her co-stars and crew. Throughout her career, Monroe was signed and released from several contracts with film studios. In the mid-1950s, Monroe grew tired of bubbly, dumb blonde roles and moved to New York City to study acting with Lee Strasberg at the Actors Studio. By the early 1960s, however, Monroe's professional and personal life seemed to be in turmoil following unsuccessful relationships. Her last two films, Let's Make Love, 1960, and The Misfits, 1961, were box office disappointments. During her career, Monroe's films grossed more than $200 million. On June 19, 1942, 16-year-old Monroe wed Dougherty, a 20-year-old merchant marine. Dougherty lived next door to a friend of Monroe's mother. He suggested he could marry Monroe so she wouldn't be sent to an orphanage or another foster home. When they wed, Monroe had just turned 16, and the couple had been dating for just a few months. After Monroe's career began to take off, she sought a quickie divorce in September 1946. In 1954, Monroe was married to baseball great DiMaggio for 9 months. Following her death, DiMaggio famously had red roses delivered to her crypt for the next 20 years. Monroe's longest marriage was with playwright Miller. They first met in 1950 at a party and later began exchanging letters. They met again when Monroe moved to New York in 1955, and they began an affair while she was still married to DiMaggio. They married on June 29, 1956. Right away, the couple began having problems. Monroe experienced 2 miscarriages and an ectopic pregnancy. After Miller and Monroe had begun working together on what would have been her last film, The Misfits, they divorced on January 20, 1961. Monroe died at her Los Angeles home on August 5, 1962, at only 36 years old. An empty bottle of sleeping pills was found by her bed. There has been some speculation over the years that she may have been murdered, but the cause of her death was officially ruled as a drug overdose. Monroe was buried in her favorite Emilio Pucci dress, in what was known as a Cadillac casket, the most high-end casket available, made of heavy-gauge solid bronze and lined with champagne-colored silk. Monroe did not own a house until the last year of her life and had surprisingly few possessions. One that she prized was an autographed photo of Albert Einstein, which included an inscription, "To Marilyn, with respect and love and thanks."